this vineyard. May we continue to love on one another, to serve you, and to glorify you in all that we do. For it's in your name we pray. Amen. We're to the 5th chapter of the book of Mark. And last week, Paul talked about the parable of the sower and ended it with the instance of the calming of the sea. Mark now takes us into two more instances that are showing Jesus spreading and increasing influence. The first in the outline, the 1 through 20, Jesus heals the demoniac, and then the 21 through 43, Jairus, his daughter, is raised from the dead. But in that one, the first part, Jairus begs Jesus to heal his sick daughter, and then there is a section that's stuck in the middle. It's another one of these sandwich times in Mark, in which he starts one story, then inserts another, and then finishes it at the end. Now this one makes a little more sense because it could happen the way he described it, that the woman came up as he was on his way, as Jesus was on his way to Jairus' house. So the outline today is the demoniac in 1 through 20, then the beginning of the story of Jairus, and then the bleeding woman healed by faith, and then the conclusion of that. What Mark may be trying to say in this is that in the emphasis in 1 through 20 is that multiple demons are now addressed rather than a single one. There's a widening geographic and ethnic renown. That is, Jesus is in a different place. He is in an area where they're predominantly Gentiles, not so many Jews, and it's in a different place around the Sea of Galilee. In the woman, it shows his compassion, his ability to heal a stubborn disease that's been present for 12 years, and to touch her or to be in contact with someone who is ceremonially unclean. This is not unlike what he did with the leper when the leper said, "You can heal me if you will," and he said, "I will," and he touched him. And that made Jesus ceremonially unclean. And then the last is it's not just diseases that Jesus has power over, but the power of death also. So let's walk through this. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. Now, in Matthew they call it the country of the Gadarenes, and so it is an area where the larger city is Gadara, and the smaller city right on the coast is Gerasa. So, but it is 180 degrees from Capernaum, where he has been. So he has gone essentially directly across the Sea of Galilee to 5 o'clock, if you will, in the Sea of Galilee, and has stepped out into this area. This is more of a Gentile area. And it is different. It is away from where he has been. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, he didn't get time to have coffee. He didn't have a latte. He didn't get time to visit with his friends. He stepped out of the boat, and immediately, Mark says, there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. So, boom, we have this encounter. Jesus steps out, the man comes, and then Mark begins to tell us about the man. He lived among the tombs. No one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. Now, it implies that he needed to be bound. He lived among the tombs, the caves dug out into the side of the hills. So he was living in the unclean part. You couldn't touch a tomb if you were a devout Jew. You were ceremonially unclean if you did so, even if you stepped on a tomb. and no one could bind him, implying that he was perceived to be dangerous. He was perceived to be somebody who could hurt you. And when they talk about him, for he had been bound with shackles and chains, but he tore the chains apart, broke the shackles, and no one had the strength. And day and night among the tombs, he was always crying out and bruising himself or cutting himself with stones. The blood-curdling scream of someone who is demonized, who is psychotic, is an unnerving thing. This story has always bothered me. It's bothered me because of the pathology of the man and his total depravity, if you will, or his total being controlled by this evil spirit. In several years ago, I had the opportunity to go and examine certain state schools and state hospitals, and in one school that we went to, there was a person, a younger woman, who was in a padded cell. Now this is not the 40s, gentlemen. This is the 80s, and we certainly had lots of medicines then to control psychosis and to control people who were out of control. But this one could not be controlled. She was in a padded cell without clothes, and when she turned around, I immediately noticed that she had a sunken eye socket on one side, and I turned to the person and said, "What happened?" And he said, "She pulled her own eye out and ate it." About that moment, I was standing outside looking through a little portal in this door, and she saw me and screamed at me as if she were an animal screaming to ward off someone who was going to attack her. That's been 30 years ago, or at least 20, and it still is just emblazoned on my mind. And it reminds me of this instance of this man so powerfully commandeered, so powerfully demonized by this that he screams. And then he comes down, and when he saw Jesus, he ran and he fell down before him. Now we go back to 2. Now Mark's gone back to that spot and crying out. So you can see, and this is where I can see that person screaming at me. He cried with a loud voice, and then he said to me, "What are you going to do to me, Jesus, Son of the God Most High? I beg you, I petition you, I earnestly plead with you, don't torment me. I've already been tormented enough." Now, what's happening here is that the demons have taken over the man's voice. And so they're talking. "Oh, Jesus, Son of God." And so this is the same deal we've talked about before, where if you name somebody's name in that ancient time, you could control them. So the demons are attempting to control Jesus by calling him out, saying, "You are the Son of God." And so can we control you? "Don't torment me." For he was saying to them, "Come out of you, unclean spirit." Now this is an important thing, because this word "saying" implies that Jesus had already said, "Come out." And so he was saying it again and again and again, or he was saying it at least more than once. It was an ongoing petition or command to come out. And so you say, well, why did it take more than one? Well, there were legions, it says. And Jesus asked him, "What was your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out into the country. A legion in the Roman army was about 6,000 men, plus horses, plus supportive people. The Jews knew what a legion was. They knew how they could come into their villages and control them. They knew that when a legion appeared, that they took total control. And so here was a legion of demons who had control and taken control of this man. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us into the pigs, let us enter them." So he, Jesus, gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herds, numbering 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. The swineherds, as it's called, like shepherds, they're called swineherds. The herdsmen fled and told those in the city what had happened, and they came to see what had happened. Now, this is no small economic impact. This may be also why this bothered me, was here, Jesus goes out and this guy gets saved, but the whole economic, perhaps the basis of this little town was impacted by 2,000 pigs going off the cliff and drowning. Well, first off, you've got to think about the smell of all of that, of 2,000 rotting corpses in your lake. That's probably where they washed their clothes and got their drinking water and a variety of other things. So they came out to see what happened. And when they came to Jesus, they saw the demon-possessed men, the one who had the legion sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. They said, "Wow, we couldn't control this guy with chains. We couldn't control this guy with shackles. We were terrified of this man who roamed around at night and screamed, and we were afraid he was going to come and take our children or kill us, and he was incredibly powerful, and now he's in his right mind. Who can do this? Who has the power to do this?" They were afraid. And those who had seen it, the events that preceded, described them to what had happened about the demon-possessed men and the pigs, and they said, "Leave this place. You are scary to us." They also may have been concerned about, maybe they had other pigs and they wanted to protect the rest of their investment. One commentator said that the pigs may have been owned by Jewish people who had gone into a Gentile area as industrial marketers, and so Jesus chose the pigs because he didn't approve of that. I think that may be a stretch, but it's an interesting concept. So they asked him to depart, to leave. And then as he was getting in the boat, the man who had been possessed with the demons begged him that he might go with him. And Jesus, now you can understand why. I mean, all of a sudden he's sitting, he's at peace, he's in his right mind, having been tormented for decades by these evil spirits, by this psychosis that had afflicted him, but Jesus didn't permit it. Why? We don't know. But first off, he probably was a Gentile. He already had selected and named the 12. But what did he do with this man? He said to him, "Go and tell your story." He says, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." The first missionary. He had, "Go and tell." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done to him and how much, and everyone marveled. So this is the Decapolis region. It's 10 cities. So Indianapolis, Decapolis, it's 10 cities, and so it is in this area that he was talking. And so this is again it's across the Jordan River from where most of the Jews lived, and so this man began to be a missionary to the Gentiles, telling them about grace and the gifts and the power of Jesus. And when Jesus had crossed again in a boat, so now we go to the second story. the faith of a synagogue leader. He crossed again in a boat to the other side. A great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Now, we think that he went to Capernaum, back across. It's not specified, but we think that he went back over there. And then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay hands on her so that she may be made well and live." Now, think back a little bit to chapter 3, verse 1, where it says, "He entered the synagogue, and the man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath so they might accuse him." If indeed this was Capernaum, then Jairus was the head of this synagogue. Jairus was one of the people that set up this encounter. Jairus was one of the people that sought to trap Jesus to see if he would really heal on the Sabbath. And what Mark tells us about this was that Jesus had compassion on the man with the withered hand, and he said, "Come here." And then he said to the people, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill?" They were silent. He looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and they were restored, and the Pharisees immediately held counsel with the Herodians to destroy him. So this man very likely saw that encounter, that tender encounter of Jesus with a man with a withered hand probably from birth, who had compassion on him. And so he was at a point of desperation. He had no other options. His daughter, age 12, in Matthew it says, in Luke it says it's his only daughter. And his daughter is at the point of death. And so he comes to Jesus and says, "Please, come, just touch her. Just touch her, so that she may live. And he went with him. So immediately Jesus didn't say, "I've got things to do. I've got an important meeting here. I've got some other folks that I need to see. There's some other important people here." No, he says he went with him. And then we have this insert of the other story. It follows in the chronology because as the great crowd was following him and thronged about him as he was going, then the woman appears. There was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, who had suffered under many physicians and spent all she had and was no better, but really grew worse. The medical term is probably metamenorrhagia, which just means that she either had uterine fibroids or she had some condition in which she bled essentially all the time. The important thing about this is that is the impact that this would have on her socially and the impact that this would have on her medically. From a social standpoint, she was unclean. Unclean physically, meaning she probably smelled. Unclean ceremonially, because a woman who was in her menstrual period had to wait until that was over, wait several days, then go through a cleansing process in order to be able to go back into the temple. So she was ostracized now for 12 years from her community of faith. She couldn't come. She had to stand across Northland and look as the church convened and as things went on in the synagogue, because she could not come into the fellowship anymore because of this bleeding. Physically, it is a constant loss of red cells. And physically, this person is going to be anemic, weak, fatigued, pale, and exhausted all the time. Just like Jairus, she is desperate. She has tried everything. She has gone to all the physicians. She has gone to all the healers. In some of the commentaries, there are a variety of things talked about as to what are tried. You know, if you stand here and do this, and if you bend over and do that, and if you sit at the side of the road and wait for someone to come by, and if they have on red shoes, then you should be healed. And I mean, it's a bunch of poppycock, but that's what people were telling her to try. Not unlike what happens to us today when someone that we love has cancer and they say there's nothing else we can do, and then we start thinking about Laetrile from Mexico, or we start thinking about some other treatment programs that are totally unproven, but in desperation, we'll try to do that. Well, this is no different than her. And she had heard reports about Jesus, and she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. In Luke, it says she touched the hem of his garment, the tassel, perhaps, that's on the corner of his garment, because she knew, she felt, she had faith that all she had to do was touch his garment, and she'd be made well. And when she touched Jesus' robe, immediately the flow of blood dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed of the disease. And Jesus, perceiving that something had gone out of him, immediately turned around the crowd and said, "Who touched my robe? Who touched me?" Well, the disciples said, "Lord, there are people bumping around you all over the place. I mean, we're in a crowd. They're pushing around. I mean, you see the crowd pressing, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" They didn't get it. Jesus wasn't saying touched. He was saying touched. Who came to me with faith and reached out and allowed me to give power to them. And he looked around to see who had done it. And the woman, now at this point, she knows she's cured. She feels the power of Jesus coming into her. He is human enough to sense that power going out of him. And then she knows that she's going to have to identify herself. She thought she could just sneak in, and knowing that if she just touched it, she'd be cured. But now he felt it. Now he's looking around saying, "Who touched me?" And so, knowing what happened, she came and with fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Now, some in the leaders' meeting yesterday thought that the whole truth might imply that she had a real backstory, that there was something else. There were lots of stuff going on here. That maybe she had a real sinful history, or that she had whatever. But whatever it was, she bared her soul to him. She told the whole story. And that, I think, is what some of us need to hear. Because for men in particular, we have a tendency to want to tell other guys just what we want them to know. I don't want you to know how I'm really feeling. I don't want you to really know that I'm hurting. I don't want you to really know that finances are not good for me right now. I'm going to tell you what I want you to know. And when it comes to Jesus, that doesn't work so well. Because you can't be partially engaged with Jesus. First off, he knows, whether you say it or not. But secondly, it is that gift of unburdening, that opportunity that we have of saying, "Jesus, I am at the end of my rope. I can't do it. I've tried to be the Lord of my own life, and it sucks. It doesn't work. It ain't working for me so good at all, and I fall on my face before you, and here's the whole sin picture of me, the whole truth." And Jesus said to her, "Daughter," oh, what a tender little phrase. Jesus doesn't do this anywhere else in Mark. "Daughter, your faith has made you well." Not touching the garment, not some magic. There's nothing magic in my cloak. There's nothing magic in touching the tassel. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace, spiritual healing, and be healed of your disease, physical healing. So faith has made you well both ways. Poof, that story's over. Now we're back to Jairus. And while he was speaking, Jesus was speaking to the woman, there came from the ruler's house some who said, your daughter's dead. She's passed. She's gone. She's ceased to breathe. She is now dead. Why trouble the teacher further? But Jesus didn't wait for them to tell him that. He overheard that, and he said to the ruler, don't fear, only believe. In Mark 4:40, where they were on the boat, and Jesus turned to them and he said, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? To his own disciples. So it's the same theme. Don't fear, just believe. And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John. Well, who's telling this story to Mark? It's Peter. So here you've got an eyewitness account to this encounter with Jairus' daughter and this healing of Jairus' daughter in Peter, who has told the story to Mark, who's writing it down. And they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion of people weeping and wailing loudly. If you've ever seen this event, either on film or personally, it is pretty dramatic because it is the cultural thing to wail and cry loudly. And when he entered, he said to them, why are you making such a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. Now, that doesn't mean they said, that's funny. They laughed at him. They jeered him. They said, right. You don't know what you're talking about. You've walked in here saying that she's asleep. We know she's dead. It's a derision. It's not a fun laughing. And they laughed at him, but he put them all outside. He said, y'all go outside. Y'all go on, get out. And he took the child's mother and father and the disciples to where the child was, and taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha cum, which means little lamb, arise. Little lamb, get up. What a tender picture. Now again, ceremonially, Jesus doesn't care that he is touching a dead body. He doesn't care about the rules. He has gone into the Gerasenes. He has gone into the place where pigs live and tombs are and crazy people live, and he's communed with a demoniac. He has touched a leper, and now he has touched this little girl in order that she may live. I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up, began to walking, for she was 12 years old, and they were overcome with amazement. Now the next sentence is kind of amazing. Now we've gone through this many times about why he said don't tell anybody. But this one, I mean, how can you not tell anybody? I mean, first off, there's this whole group of people who were weeping and wailing when he comes up. She's fixing to walk out, and they're going to know that Jesus did the healing. But he said, don't tell anybody. And then he says, let's get back to normal. Give her something to eat. This girl looks hungry. She's been sick for a few days. Whatever she had, Jesus perceived that she needed physical nourishment like any human being does, and said, feed her. Let's get back to normal. Let's get on with life. An act that a human Jesus would think about more than perhaps a supernatural Jesus. So out of this came some D's for me. First, that he went into this demon-possessed area, and I just mentioned it. It was an area where pigs lived, and it was an area of darkness, and it was an area of tombs. And it created a distance. This demoniac had to stay away from people. He had to stay out away from people because he was different from them, and he was afflicted with this. The woman who had the bleeding was desperately dirty, and she was desperate. She was desperate because she had given up everything she had, all of her money, all of her efforts. She had done everything she knew to do to get cured of this and could not be cured, and it created distance for her. She could no longer be close to others, and she could no longer be in community. Well, the same thing happens to you and me. When we sin, we will tend to identify ourselves with shame, and we will withdraw. We'll withdraw from our brothers. We'll withdraw from our spouses. We will withdraw from those who love us because we are ashamed. And we want distance away from those who might hold us accountable. When we are possessed with that demon of alcoholism, or that demon of pornography, or that demon of whatever it may be for you, we will tend to distance ourselves again from our brothers in here, your brothers in your small group, men who may hold you accountable in your business, in your office, your wife. You will not tell her about what you're thinking or what you're doing because you think you can handle it. Well, gentlemen, you can't. The longer we try to be the Lord of our own lives, the longer we walk down the road of darkness and distance ourselves further and further from Jesus and from His healing grace. There is no place that He won't follow us. And then lastly, desperate and dead. Jairus was desperate. His daughter was about to die, his only daughter, the apple of his eye. If you've had a daughter who's gotten to 12, you know that that's such a blooming age. Here she is about to enter puberty. She's just, they're vivacious. They've got their own mind. This is generally right before they get into the huffy stage. And they're just delightful about age 12. And so you can see his desperateness. But yet she was dead. And Jesus was able to raise her. And then another D was darkness. When we're alone in sin, we distance ourselves, and there's no place so dark that Jesus won't pursue us to get there. There is no sin pattern that you have that Jesus won't meet you there in the muck, in the tombs, in the pigsty, amid the mess that you've created around yourself, and say, "Come with me. Get out of him. Leave him. Leave him alone. He's mine." And there's no addiction that cannot submit to the power of Jesus. So come out of the darkness and have the faith like the woman did that said, if I can just touch it, touch his garment. Allow Jesus the access and grace and power to triumph. One of the things that we know is that Jesus has the power to overcome anything except our outstretched hand. If we say, I don't want any part of you, then Jesus won't come. Jesus will stay away. And it is that outstretched hand, that rejection, that is the most fearful for all of us. And we do that, most of us, because we think we can handle it. I can do it. It's not a big deal. We're just visiting. It's not a big deal. I'm in control. I got it under control, God. But you don't. You don't, because you're on that slippery slope that leads to sin. And in 5:20 it says, he went away and began to proclaim how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. So for you and for me, what do we do in response to God's grace? Do we come back for more and gripe about the sermon? Do we come back and sit and be pew potatoes and say, well, I didn't think the music was very good this week. That sermon just didn't speak to me, or I really don't like it when Tom Mitchell preaches or Jill preaches or somebody else preaches. I'm just not getting much out of that. Or do we go and tell people what God has done for us? That's all it is. That's all being a missionary is. That was the greatest mystery to me when I went to Africa, was that I didn't have to know, I didn't have to be smart about the Bible. I didn't have to know the Bible. I didn't have to be able to argue with people about particular points. All I had to say was, this is the way I was, and Jesus changed my life, and this is the way I am. It's my story. No one can argue with my story. And so how do you respond to that grace? Questions that may be something to talk about in your group. How did you show gratitude for His grace? Desperate times sometimes force us to Jesus. What keeps us away? Desperate times. Are you desperate? Or you still think you can control it? Let's pray. Father God, thank you for the gift